Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and to the weird and creepy schools beyond. I am your host, Constantine Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by King Newbie and weird green-scaled suction-cupped hand grabbing you in the closet. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going, Matt?
I'm doing great, Scott. Hey, just come over here. I'm a little hungry.
What do you think that thing was? That's the big question.
I love not knowing. That's kind of maybe the overarching idea for this whole week's reading is.
I think you're right.
What is that? With no answer.
And then the book says,
Yeah.
This week on the show, we spend a few chapters at the Thayer School, an American institution and or a creepy school from hell, whichever is up to you to decide. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Really, really different stuff this week. In a couple of different ways. I mean, we have this weird descent into psychedelic madness in Thayer School, which I loved for a variety of reasons. And then the other thing I really loved about it is we do this deep dive on Richard's psychology, which is just some of my favorite stuff in the book so far, honestly. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this week's reading.
Yeah, and then we finish everything up with an interlude back with Morgan Sloat, and this time we also get to see Morgan Avoris as well, which will serve kind of as a here, let me help you understand what's going on before we move into our third act of our book.
Yeah. While we do get a lot of confusion and surrealism, we also get some answers finally. Yeah.
I think this is a really weird section, and I'm kind of glad we covered basically all of it in one episode. I think the weird thing about Thayer is in this grand scheme of the book, it's kind of sandwiched between these two very big and well-liked set pieces. You know, Sunlight Home, obviously for very obvious reasons, is a very distinct moment in this book. No spoilers, but we're about to move to a section called The Blasted Lands, which is what you're told at the very end of this week's reading. That is also a very distinct and very memorable section of the book. And between that, you have Thayer, which is, as you said, just kind of weird and hard to pin down and hard to understand. And I think, as you said, that is all 100% intentional, but I think it means it's lost a little in the grand scheme of this book. So I'm glad that we get to spend a couple hours just talking about Thayer.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that makes sense.
All right, let's get into it. But before we do, we have a couple quick announcements. We just wanted to let y'all know about some of the other shows we have going on in our network. First up, this week on the Doofcast, Matt, we're doing something a little bit different, I think.
Yeah, tell us about it, Scott.
We're going to do an episode. We're actually... I don't know what we're going to call this episode, but we're doing like normally we review a movie and then talk about something else and then call it a day. This time we're going to talk about a person. We're going to talk about Mike Flanagan a little bit, the director of Dr. Sleep, a movie that y'all might know something about. And of course, the hit television show Midnight Mass from last year. We are going to be doing some in-depth Midnight Mass coverage sometime in the future, but I think both Matt and I were really itching to talk about it a little bit more broadly, and we didn't have a movie we were really feeling this week to talk about, so we thought, let's just talk about Flanagan for a couple hours. We've both seen Dr. Sleep and Midnight Mass, and I've seen some of the other stuff he's done, so we figured let's just have a Mike Flanagan cast. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, it's all well and good to say that we'll do more in-depth coverage later on, but I want to do it now.
Yeah. So we're going to do that. And it's going to be a good one, I think. I think there's a lot of good things to say about Mr. Flanagan and the things he's doing in the entertainment world.
Yeah, and if you're a Stephen King fan, I think you'll like a lot of it.
Yeah, we did talk about Dr. Sleep on our Other Levels of the Tower episode, which you can get access to by joining our Patreon. That's patreon.com/doofmedia. But that's the only place we've talked about Dr. Sleep. So it's an opportunity to talk about it in another venue as well.
Yeah.
And then later that same day, because that episode is going to come out on Friday, we are meeting once again this Friday over on our YouTube page to discuss our monthly book club. Matt, what book were we doing this month?
This month we are covering Flowers for Algernon, the classic, relatively short novel.
Beloved novel.
Much referenced, seldom read.
Yeah, that's true.
No, it's interesting. One thing we're finding out from a variety of people is that apparently a lot of people read some kind of abridged, shortened version of Flowers for Algernon in school, and are only now realizing that is in fact the case, because it is a novel. It is a short novel, but it is a novel. So I'm just mentioning that because maybe you think that you've read Flowers for Algernon, but maybe you've also only read a much shorter version of it.
Yeah, having made it about halfway through this novel so far, I can tell you I definitely didn't read a lot of the stuff that's happening in this thing in school. I don't think they would have let us. There's a lot of sex in this movie, or actually, very distinctly, there's not a lot of sex, but there's a lot of discussion of sex in this novel. So yeah, I don't think we read that part in school.
Yeah.
But that will be this Friday at 9:30 p.m. Central Time over on our YouTube channel. If you just head over to YouTube and type Doof Media, you'll be able to find us there. And make sure you subscribe to that. And then you will see every time we're live for the book club, which is once a month. Hope you join us. I think it's a book that a lot of people, as you said, Matt, maybe have not read, but maybe have read or at least know enough about to talk about for a couple hours. It's a whole interactive discussion. We have our YouTube chat going the whole time, and we're interacting and talking and discussing the book. It's a lot of fun, and if you've never been, I think this is a pretty good book to do it for because A, it's short, B, you probably know most of the story anyway from cultural osmosis, and C, I'm asking you to.
That's right. There you go.
One last thing before we start, Matt. We got an email from one of our listeners, Jennifer D, talking about one of the problems she had with the Talisman. And I thought this was interesting enough to briefly talk about it before we got into this week's reading.
Yeah. This is an interesting comment. And it's something that's been thinking about me Jesus Christ, Matt, that's been bothering me as well. So, yeah.
Interesting. You want to read what Jennifer says here?
Jennifer says, I have a gnawing problem with the Talisman that I have to get off my chest. Jack's injuries, being whipped, having the shit beat out of him, and having his hands burned to the point of black and bubbling wounds, and we just never talk about it again. I mean, I grazed my pinky on the curling iron, and my life is ruined for 4 days. It can't be just me who sees this glaring omission in the story. Still, I love it, and I want to hear your thought. Thanks.
So you said, Matt, that this is bugging you. So you have noticed this a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I called it out the first time that he was whipped, and I was like, whips like cut if they're being. So the idea was that he was being whipped hard, not just to, a gentle whipping, and whips like cut flesh. So his back would be crisscrossed with bleeding wounds, and he just like walks it off. So my low-key theory, I don't know whether they call it a theory. I don't know if I really believe it, but I guess I can call it a theory in the sense of could be, is that he just has like magical healing powers because he's Jesus. Which, if that's never called out specifically, then I would be skeptical. But I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case because, I mean, he does shrug off all these injuries. But then again, maybe it's just that these writers didn't want to have to devote lots of pages to how much pain Jack is in all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think our writers are much more interested in Jack's emotional pain than they are his physical pain. I think this is interesting, and it's one of those things that when people tell me that it bothers them, I totally get why. It's not a thing that has ever bothered me in any of the times I've read this book. It's not something I've ever consciously noticed. Of course, you are both correct in that the book makes absolutely zero mention of the fact that Jack's hands were very, very badly burned just a day ago. No mention of it at all. Like none of what he does. Like there's not even like one sentence here or there. I wonder. And this is really, I have no support of this at all, Matt, but I wonder if this is one of the symptoms of like co-writing a novel, of having one person write one section and the other then taking over and writing the next section. And the continuity of, physicality just doesn't follow through from set piece to set piece and sequence to sequence.
Yeah. I agree that is entirely possible. Or even just like how the idea that everything that I write is going to have to be distorted by the fact that my character is now in pain. I've thought before about the fact that headaches are not that uncommon in the real world. Mm-hmm. I have like a headache condition, so headaches are often on my mind, literally and figuratively, and I noticed that nobody ever has headaches in fiction. And the reason, in my opinion, is that you can't translate pain on the page very well, especially not chronic pain. Like you can convey using metaphor and imagery and so forth. You can convey like, oh no, he broke his leg and the pain in that moment was blinding. But writing wise, you can't keep up a constant refrain of background pain. And so the idea, like in truth, if you have a bad burn on your hand, exactly like Jennifer says, that is like dominating your consciousness for like the entire day.
Yeah.
At least. And it's like, how do you write that? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know if I've ever even read anyone attempt to write how utterly distracting it is. And I think it would become boring. So ultimately, I think it's a combination of just the practicality of it being kind of not worth it to try to portray physical pain the way it would really be. And also kind of, I think what you said, where it's just not what it's not what these writers are interested in. They're trading the story back and forth. Neither of them wants to write a story about a boy who's in physical pain all the time. And they just kind of let it fall away.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to that. I agree with you on the whole it's boring thing. I think, I mean, like pain and physical pain in a story is always kind of just a means to an end. It's like, that's why the joke of movies, like anytime someone like gets a headache in movies, it's like, uh-oh, brain cancer. Because like there has to be a plot reason for a character to get a headache, or else why are you doing it?
Right.
Like why just have the character, oh, my head hurts, unless you're actually paying that off in some way. So yeah, I mean, I agree, just like sitting there with pain in a story, unless that's literally the entire point of the story, is just not very, very, narratively interesting.
Yeah, what's the narrative purpose of my headaches?
I do think in this, like, I don't think the book needs us to sit with Jack's burnt hand pain for a chapter. I do think like he went to, hug Richard and his hand hurt because he got fucking burned a day ago, like just like a small acknowledgement that this is something he's still actively suffering from.
Yeah. Or he, favored one hand because something like that. I agree. It does seem to be missing. I mean, it's funny because now I'm remembering like the flip side of this is in the Wheel of Time books. One of the characters has like a wound that like magically never heals, and you just have to keep hearing about this fucking wound for like literally thousands of pages. And
that sounds awful.
Like, I don't care. His wound throbbed. I don't care about the wound anymore. I get it. The wound is always there. Okay. So it does become like, I think it's probably wise to kind of omit it, but I also agree with what you just said, that like practical considerations would be interesting.
Yeah, between those two options, I definitely pick the King and Straub one here. I'd rather not hear about the pain at all than hear about it too much. But yeah. Good comment, Jennifer. Thank you so much for contributing. Let's waste no further time because we're already somehow 15 minutes into the show. We haven't even started talking about the chapters. All right, Matt, let's go to chapter 30. Thayer Gets Weird. We begin this week with Jack hanging out in Richard's dorm room as Richie heads off to basketball practice. As the title of the chapter indicates, things are about to get really weird really fast. But for now, things seem to be okay, and we see Jack gets a brief moment to take his breath, and I just love the irony of this statement here. A feeling of security returned to him, a school around him with all those familiar rituals of bells and classes and basketball practices. Maybe he would be okay to stay another day. Maybe he would even be able to call his mother from one of the Nelson House phones. He would certainly be able to catch up on his sleep. None of that's true. None of it at all.
Yeah. It's more like an hour of rest and then everything goes to hell.
Yeah, I mean, the most he gets is a shower, right? Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, probably would have hurt those burns on his hands. But whatever, Jack.
Oh no, it's ruined for me now.
I know. But the interesting thing about this is, as much as we feel bad for Jack here, this week's reading, these next few chapters, Matt, are actually barely about Jack. Really, this is the story, Thayer as a whole is the story of Richard Sloat. And I love how the text kind of indicates that right away here, as Jack spends the early part of the chapter kind of trying to figure Richard out based on the stuff he has here. Mm-hmm. I love this line here. Richard had become, Jack saw, an admirer of John McPhee and Lewis Thomas and Stephen Jay Gould. He picked the panda's thumb from a row of books on Richard's shelves because he liked the title and returned to bed.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the Richard Sloat stuff this week is some of my favorite in the book overall, because it's just this delightful deep dive into his mind and the way he sees the world, and it's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I mean, so I totally agree, and we got a little bit of that last week, but I maybe you probably weren't expecting how deep we were going to go with Richard this week, which we absolutely are. And I like this, like we're kind of being shown here, and we'll say this textually later, that Richard hates novels. He doesn't read novels. He doesn't like fiction. But here we see King and Straub list, I would say, three of the not the biggest, but some of the most influential nonfiction writers of the 20th century, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know these names.
Yeah. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, and I know them too. And of course, whenever King references a book's title, it's worth looking into what that book is actually about and see if it reveals something about our story. So let's talk about The Panda's Thumb for a second here, Matt.
Let's do.
The Panda's Thumb is a collection of essays by Stephen Jay Gould, one of those three authors listed in this section. And the titular essay in this thing is about the seeming paradox between the idea that poor design is actually a better indicator of the existence of evolution than good or quality design is. The titular Panda's Thumb here is the example that is used in this essay, because it's not actually a thumb. It's just like a weird outgrowth of the wrist bone that is particularly good at helping the panda grip onto some delicious bamboo, because it's so good. So like, that's an interesting idea, right? That's an interesting concept. And I want to take that and I want to apply it to what's happening in these chapters, because I think it's this wonderful study on how our world is this wonderful mix of order and chaos and seeming order out of chaos. But even something like the Panda's Thumb, which looks like a thumb, right? But it's not actually. It doesn't make sense, but it actually does make sense. But it doesn't, like, it depends on the way you look at it. It's just really, really fascinating to me how we're introducing this concept in these particular chapters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really interesting. I think actually evolution is a perfect metaphor for the yin yang, struggle yet balance that exists between chaos and order. Because, what we have is we have chaos producing genetic mutations, and then we have the chaos of animals trying to survive and killing each other and trying to breed. And then those two kinds of chaos paradoxically lead to a selection amongst those mutations for the winners, for the beneficial mutations. And so the product of all of that chaos is actually ordered and complex life forms. That's a really interesting concept right there.
So there we go. The life is a mixture between our plane of existence and the territories. And between these two things, somehow we find existence. Yeah.
Life finds a way.
Damn it. And then suddenly, Matt, as if out of nowhere, the entire student population of Thayer is gone. This is our first instance of this weird shifting that occurs at Thayer. We'll talk more about this in a bit, but it's worth pointing out that as soon as things start to go wrong here, Jack shifts immediately into his self-deprecation mode, right? We see here, it says, "The afternoon died. Richard, too, he thought, was dead. Perhaps all Thayer School was dead, and he was a plague bearer, a carrier of death. He had eaten nothing all day since the chicken Richard had brought him from the dining room, but he wasn't hungry. Jack sat in numb misery. He brought destruction wherever he went." So, I mean, Matt, we've talked about Jack and how he's not directly responsible for all the deaths that have happened around him, right? That the bad people around him are the ones directly responsible for these deaths. But it's not wrong per se to say that every place Jack has stumbled upon, bad shit has happened there, and as a result, people end up suffering, right?
Yeah, it's totally understandable why he would feel this way, but it's just him being all Jesus-y. Yeah,
it is, but isn't it? I mean, the sentence that really got me was, he was a plague bearer, a carrier of death, because that's inverse Jesus, right? Jesus is supposed to be the bringer of eternal life. And Jack can't see himself that way right now.
Yeah, well, I think, he hasn't done any, as far as he knows, he hasn't done anything positive, right? And I mean, frankly, as far as we know, he hasn't done anything positive either. It's not like there's this trail of deeds that he's done that have actually had all these positive consequences that he doesn't know about. I mean, if that's the case, we don't know about them either.
Yeah, I mean, he has one singular goal here, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is heading for the Talisman, and unlike, let's say, the Dark Tower, the set pieces and sequences he stumbles upon on his way to his particular tower are not filled with him saving the people of those places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like very early in the Gunslinger's quest, like he would walk into a town and he would leave the town destroyed, right?
Mm-hmm.
He did that in Tull, and that continued, I mean, through Lud, but eventually the Gunslinger got to a point where like we take a whole curveball and have them save a town and like do some Seven Samurai stuff and save this town of these people suffering. There's been none of that for Jack so far. So it has just been destruction along his way with this nebulous goal of life at the end of it. So he doesn't have a lot to hang on to.
Right. I mean, the closest thing you could say would be that he broke open Sunshine Gardener's operation. But a whole bunch of boys were horribly killed in the process. So you can't even really feel that great about it. Yeah, I guess that kind of does remind me of Caliburn and Sturgis, actually. But anyway,
Sure.
he doesn't view that as having been a heroic deed is more, I think, the point. And also he didn't have a ton. I mean, yeah, he was there, but it was kind of Wolf that did it. So
yeah.
Anyway, like I think we're gesturing at the core of it is that is simply not the story we're telling.
Right.
It is not a. It is not Odyssean. I don't know. Does Odysseus ever save anyone, or is it just a bunch of bad shit that happens in his
Not
wake?
really. It's just a bunch of bad shit. I mean, like I feel like his crew kind of like tapers down over the course of his journey until it's really him and I think two other guys by the end of it is all that's left of his giant crew as they by the time they get home. So yeah, no, it's not like Odysseus shows up at X Island and saves the people. I mean, they kill the Cyclops, but like that was probably just a dude just trying to eat some lambs, He wasn't doing anything wrong.
He's just like a shepherd. He was basically Wolf. Asshole. Yeah. No, so it is. I guess it is Odyssean in that way because Odysseus is not a gunslinger. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and to your point, I think if they wanted this book to be like that, they could have peppered it with scenes of that, right? Like you could have these moments of tragedy and devastation, like Sunlight Home, but you could have had moments where, hey, Jack saved the day. Like maybe your friend Ferd was saved by Jack. Jack intervenes at the last moment and allows Ferd to escape, and that's something he can hang on to feel good about himself. But no, we don't. No, none of that. Jack freezes as Ferd leaves and then dies unceremoniously, and he just has to feel bad about that too.
Exactly. Yeah, that would have been the perfect opportunity to have just one little grace note, but no, absolutely not.
Nope. Suddenly, the people of Thayer seem to snap back into existence. This is indicated by some Blue Oyster Cult being played in one of the rooms above, which I will say is just a perfect tone setter for the mood of the chapter. This kind of trippy, let's be honest, drug music. It's drug music. And it's perfect for the crazy shit that's about to happen.
Yeah.
And then Richard shows up with a really strange story of this weird guest basketball coach who like clearly didn't know anything about basketball but is just there, and it's just like this is I think the moment of greatest confusion in the chapters this week where you're just like what am I supposed to feel about that? Because I mean what Jack feels is like fuck, he's working for this territory shit again, fuck. But like us the readers are just like what?
Well, like we're able to put two and two together, and we're like, okay, this is some kind of territories guy. Maybe he's one of these werewolves. Maybe he's a monster. But why though? why basketball coach? Like shouldn't they be eagerly chasing down Jack? Why would they be replacing the basketball coach with a deranged creature? And overall, as you say, weird is now the word of the day from this point on. because we basically throw out the window all of the rules and expectations for how the magic system in this world works, and what how we understand things to be set up, and it just kind of becomes psychedelic chaos.
And I mean, this is intentional, I think. Like this is a story, or at least the section we are in is a mini story about a man who cannot deal with the fantastical, right? Who lives in this extreme sense of order. Everything has to make sense. Everything has to be rational. Everything needs an explanation. And this is a chapter in which none of the things happening have any explanation. Not in the real world, not in even in the fantastical world we're living in. None of this lines up with anything we have understood works between our world and the territories. And so we're kind of left in this place of like, you can either try to rationalize a way into what is happening here, or you can kind of just let it emotionally sweep over you. And I think that's what our authors are doing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think there is, we'll get into it, but I think I don't mind. It's not like I'm criticizing the book for doing that. Like I think as you say, it's having the desired effect on the reader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so we move into our next chapter, chapter 31. Thayer goes to hell. So that escalated. We see here that as Jack and Richard leave his room, it seems that the people of Thayer are disappearing again. Or maybe Thayer is flipping over, or they are, or something. I don't know. Neither does Jack here, though. We see in this moment where Richard says, over in the territories, I suppose. I don't know, Jack said. Maybe they're still here, but on a slightly different level. Maybe they're there. Maybe they're in Cleveland, but they're not where we are.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm inappropriately using a label from something that King invented years later, but it really helped me a lot to think of Thayer as a thinny. It's a place where the rules don't apply and weird random shit happens because it's a thin spot between the worlds. I mean, the book basically says that. It just doesn't call it a thinny, and King hasn't developed that concept as much as he's going to develop it later, but it's clearly spiritually related.
Yeah, this is, I mean, that's the in-universe explanation for everything that is happening is this is a thin spot between worlds, and so weird shit happens here. We'll see this when we're in the interlude section textually. But okay. So even with that explanation in mind, you're just like, okay, but so like, are the events that are happening right now because Jack is here? Or is this just like a week at Thayer? Like, like if this is a thin spot between worlds where weird shit is happening all the time, like, is any of this specifically because of Jack? Or is it just, this is kind of, just weird shit happens in this place, like, I don't know.
Interesting. See, my assumption was that it was because Jack was here. And
I think it is, but like, just trying to get my hand around
like
why what is
actually. Yeah.
Which, I mean, I just want to state here at the beginning of this whole thing that it is deeply ironic and wonderful that Richard Sloat hates fantasy and fae and anything, magical, like came to live and go to school at basically Spook Central. Like this is basically like someone who doesn't believe in ghosts moving in to Dana Barrett's apartment. And like, it's deeply ironic in a wonderful, wonderful way.
Yeah. That definitely amplifies the drama of all of Richard's reactions here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pick out the wording in that bit that you read there where Jack literally says, maybe they're still here, but on a slightly different level.
Yeah.
And the language of referring to it as a level, it's like, well, we of course know what he means. It's like maybe all the students have been nudged to a slightly different level of the tower, and they're alone on this level.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what's happening here, right? That for some reason, maybe because Jack is here, because forces are trying to maneuver themselves to get Jack, that people are shifting and magic has been brought here, and it's causing reality to go haywire.
And I want to put a pin in something which I'm going to talk about a bit as we go, which is that Richard remains on the level that Jack is on.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow the powers that be have kept Richard and Jack together.
Yeah.
And I have things to say about that in a bit.
All right. I can't wait to hear that. So Jack and Richard find a room that reeks of the scent of pot, which makes sense. Blue Oyster Cult was playing. And it makes sense that this is just what a dorm of a kid from the 70s and 80s kind of looks like, right? Pretty standard stuff. But I love the way Richard reacts to this. It's against the rules. They're breaking the rules. And then in a bit, we see that a group of kids is outside on the quad, also smoking some doobers, brazenly breaking the rules again. And I love this line here. There was an open history text on the desk, an issue of Heavy Metal on the other. Posters decorated the walls. The Costa de Sol, Frodo and Sam trudging across the cracked and smoked plain of Mordor towards Sauron's castle. Eddie Van Halen. Earphones lay on the open issue of Heavy Metal, getting out little tinny squeaks of music. I love this because this is just a room. There's nothing really otherworldly here.
There's nothing otherworldly, but I guess what's otherworldly is it's like wrong relative to what Richard expects. And I think the thing that struck me about everything is like, it's not that it's turning into the territories, right? It's not that he looks on the wall and he sees, horses and wagons and
sure
farming equipment. It's like the place is becoming liberal. And I say this because it's like my sense from the point of view of Richard is like he has this way of seeing the world, and the way in which the place is decaying around him is a reflection of what is most shocking to him specifically.
Yeah.
And I think that that's intentional. Like I think that the universe is actually reacting to Richard specifically. Like he's the one, this is what I kind of wanted to say. He's the one that this place is attuned to. And Jack is his passenger in the sense that Richard is the one sort of guiding the descent into hell. Because everything that's happening is like calibrated to freak Richard out specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on there. That is well said. I agree completely. And I think this is really great because you have to ask yourself the question, is this room we're seeing a different room than it would have been otherwise, right? Like, is the shock that we're seeing on Richard here because we've moved to a more liberal version of Thayer School in another universe? Or is this just how people at Thayer live and Richard has blinded himself to it because he sees the world through a very specific lens? I mean, I think when you get down to it, you're right that it's all metaphor, that the descent of Thayer is specifically reflected in Richard's losing of himself and his conservative single-mindedness being slowly yanked away from him as what the world actually is, and the full scope of the world is kind of forcefully thrown at him. Like it falls to pieces. It literally rots through the walls. I think that's spot on. But yeah, I mean, I love the idea of like, we're actually still just at Thayer, Richard, and this is just this guy's room. Like,
yeah,
this is just what the students here are like. Some of them are like you and are strict and follow the rules, and some of them kind of stretch them a little bit. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think I figured in a literal sense that this room probably doesn't look like this on Richard's level of the tower. But also I think along the lines of what you're saying, like if we go to the level of metaphor, Richard, your fellow students are probably more like this room would suggest than what you believe. So yeah, I mean, there's plenty to talk about along those lines as we go. Before we move on from this particular passage, the imagery of Frodo and Sam trudging across the cracked and smoking plains of Mordor immediately made me think about like, okay, well, Richard and Jack are heading into a place called the Blasted Lands. And so, is Richard going to be Sam to Jack's Frodo as they trudge across Mordor, basically?
See, you're smart. You're smart. I didn't even have to throw that towards you. You picked up on that all on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done. No, I think you're spot on there. That this is imagery we're intentionally summoning. Like, I mean, this book continually does this, right? Like we're gonna have a section here, hilariously, like first just gestures towards the concept of Narnia, and then just directly states it.
Yeah, no, specifically, references, yeah.
I really love this moment here as well. Jack looks at Richard's like indignation and shock at boys breaking rules, and it says here that Jack's heart was full of pity for his friend, but also full of admiration for an attitude which must seem so reactionary and even eccentric to his schoolmates. He wondered again if Richard could stand the shocks which might be on the way. Spoilers. No, he could not.
No, he was not gonna.
So Richard calls out to the kids, yelling at them for rule breaking, and we see our first distinctly unique thing about whatever the fuck is happening at Thayer. We see the Etheridge, the boy we met yelling at Jack in the last chapter, is now two-faced. It's his twinner, but it's also him. It's an in-between twinner. It's an in-between twinner.
Yeah. Let's go with it.
The right half of the face disclosed what was actually a bit like Etheridge's, an older Etheridge, an Etheridge who had been a lot of places nice prep school boys didn't go, and who had done a lot of things nice prep school boys didn't do. The other half was a twisted mass of scars, a glittery crescent that might have been an eye peering from a crater in the lumpy mess of flesh below the forehead. It looked like a marble that had been shoved deeply into a puddle of half-melted tallow, a single long fang hooked out the left corner of the mouth. So, Matt, what the fuck is happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I think at around this point, I wasn't thinking quite so metaphorically, and I was like, is this place kind of stuck in limbo between the territories and Earth? I don't know if I think that though, because like it's almost more like it's like a little bit of toad ash is leaking in or something, because shit here is like weirder and more horrible and nightmarish than shit ever got in the territories. And you know, for that matter, you know, we're not there yet, but the stuff that Richard encounters when he goes into the territories when he's a little kid, is like way more horrifying than anything that Jack has ever seen, except for maybe the brief jaunt into the trees. But it's like, what is up with Richard's relationship to the territories?
Well, and also I think at Sunlight Home, they were in a pit of fiery hell and damnation.
Fiery hell happened too. Yeah, that's true.
But we also learned that Thayer in the territories is a rail station, basically, like is just an outpost for a rail yard. And so it doesn't seem like, you know, oh, it's this here, the railway with also a giant monster fanged half man thing. You're right. It's very confused, and it's very like, and I think as you stated, this confusion and this weirdness fits Richard's inability to process this whole thing. Like perhaps if Jack was the driver and not the passenger, this would make a lot more sense, because Jack's mind would be able to roll with this weirdness in very specific ways. But it's almost as if whatever magic is happening here in this thinny is desperately trying to express itself in a way Richard can understand, while also being inherently magical and terrible. So it's like it tries to show Richard, this is what the Etheridge twinner looks like, and it can't do it all the way, because part of Richard still sees him as Etheridge, and so part of this is not exactly the same Etheridge, a bit of a different kind of Etheridge. But like, I don't know, like it just seems like the place itself is at war between order and chaos, in the same way Richard is internally at war between order and chaos. And so because there's this cutting in and out, and like we'll see throughout all these chapters, suddenly everything just goes back to normal briefly, or at least everything goes away briefly, and then rushes all back all at once. And it's like it's a reflection of what's happening inside Richard, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea that all of this is a reflection of his deeply repressed and, you know, sort of dysfunctional relationship with this part of him that is his his power. Like he's like Jack. He should have the ability to cross over as easily as Jack does, but he's been in denial of this his whole life. And this is almost like the subconscious, manifestation of all of that tension that has built up over the years.
Mm-hmm. So this is the first time of the story where we get the phrase passenger. We've already talked about it a little bit, but the Etheridge thing looks at Richard and says, "Release your passenger," which as it's such an interesting way of talking about it. And I think you are spot on in your interpretation of that. I think Jack is Richard's passenger because Richard is driving this whole thing. He's driving everything that is happening here. And I love it so much.
Yeah. The only other interpretation of the word is I think along the lines of what Jack thinks about later, that like it's a train station, and so maybe it's like
sure.
but I think it can be both of those things.
I think in my mind that was always more of just like a way of expressing how Jack's mind got from point A to point B than it is an explanation of what the fuck the Etheridge thing is actually talking about here.
Right, because it doesn't really make sense in that usage. Yeah.
And like we said, this is all for Richard. Like it's so interesting, right? Like nobody. I think at one point Jack says, "I'm tired of being treated like I'm a pizza," because nobody calls out to Jack at any of this time. No one says, "Hey, Jack, come out." I think someone responds to Jack a little bit later and tells him that his mother's dead, but only when Jack initiated the conversation. They are only talking to Richard. They are only interested in Richard, and Richard is handling the whole situation, or rather, not handling the whole situation.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's interesting. I didn't have this interpretation that Richard was kind of in the driver's seat at this point in time. I actually thought it had more to do with like they're afraid of Jack. And Jack does seem to have some kind of power over them, but I think it might just be more like maybe they can't even see Jack,
Yeah, I mean, this is something I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but one of the big questions of this whole section is why the fuck don't they just go get him? Like, obviously they can get into the dorm room because we're going to visit the common room and visit other rooms and see them completely trashed. So it's not like there's like a magical seal over the doorway into the dorm room. They are just not coming to get Jack or Richard. They're just like demanding he come out and trying to wait them out. And there's no, in-universe textual explanation for that fact.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get there, but yeah, there's definitely it's just one of the points of confusion in these chapters.
So we move on to chapter 32, titled, very fittingly, "Send Out Your Passenger." We see here that Jack is trying to block the window with the bureau, assuming correctly that the boys outside will eventually be throwing rocks into their room. We haven't said this yet, but this feels like a good time, Matt, to talk about how, like, Jack's his just resigned acceptance of this whole thing, right? Like this is Richard's chapter. We've already talked about this is for Richard. Jack never really questions what's happening here, like with the basketball coach, where instead of just like, that's really fucking weird and I don't understand why, he's just like, yeah, okay. And here he's just like, all right, let me get the bureau and put it over the door and I gotta deal with this fucking crazy shit again. Like his reaction here is not fear. There'll be time for fear later. It's not indignation or confusion. It's just
yeah, it's like he's already been through so much in this book that I'm not sure what would really scare him anymore. I mean, beyond the baseline level of fear that he's kind of gotten used to after being captured and tortured multiple times. Yeah.
So I'm going to reiterate this question again, Matt. And I don't think you answered it fully. So I'm going to ask you again. Why can't they just go get them? These two boys are stuck in this house. They're stuck in student housing, which is a nightmare. These monstrous creatures are outside. There's wolves. There's ringing bells. We'll see that there's fucking werewolves again that can rip them apart easily. Why can't they just get them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a good answer. Like, I figure it's just the rules, like maybe we'll find out specifically what the rule was here. Perhaps not, though. I mean, maybe these are more territory-ish creatures and Nelson House is too earthish for them and they can't cross the barrier. Maybe they need to be invited in, like, vampire rules. I have no reason to believe that. It's just like, well, we observe that they can't seem to just come after the boys, so therefore we have to make some guesses. I don't know. I mean, maybe this is explained later. I don't know. I mean, do you have like an interpretation of why this would be?
Well, I mean, kind of leading into your whole Richard is driving this whole thing. The world is responding to Richard, and so like he's actually in control, like not literally, but like he's the one. If he's the one driving and he's got this passenger, like he's controlling where they're going and which level, and so like they can't come to where he is. He's not in the same place they are. The only way they can access him is if he comes out to where they are.
Yeah, and you know, in whatever sense it matters, he's protecting Jack, and if he were to stop protecting Jack, that's the only way that they could get Jack. In the magical metaphorical sense. So,
yeah, I like that. So Richard is taking the increasingly crazy events of this chapter very, very well. And by that, I mean the exact opposite. He decides that he must have a fever and is hallucinating this whole thing. And therefore, the proper thing to do right now is to go to sleep. So that is exactly what he does. And I mean, I'm making fun of Richard a lot here. And I think the text is inviting us to make fun of Richard a lot here, Matt. But I do want to talk about him a bit here because there is... As we will continue to refer to it, thanks to Roland, there is steel underneath Richard a little bit, right? Because like, despite his fear, despite his rejection, his adamant rejection of everything that is happening here, despite his slipping mental state, he refuses to give up Jack. He is told very specifically, give us Jack. A little bit later in the text, it'll be like, Jack's involved in drugs. He's done bad things. Give him to us and everything will go back to normal, which you would think is exactly what Richard wants to hear right now. And yet it never really even is a temptation for him.
Yeah, not a serious one. It's interesting how many times in these stories we have the element of friends being put in a position where it would be much more convenient for them to abandon their friend.
Yeah.
We had that with Wolf and Jack. Here we have that with Richard and Jack in a different way. It just seems to be a pervasive idea in this story.
I like that. And this is a part of text here that I found really, really fascinating when I read it this time. He's looking out the open window and he's basically doing the woe is me, I regret everything here. He says he never should have stood by that open window or earlier allowed Jack through the window of his room. Richard thought this and was then deeply and immediately ashamed, right?
Right.
So he has this thought of like, I never should have done this. I never should have even let my friend come in the door. And then right away feels shame at thinking that, which is just a fascinatingly complex twist on what normally would be the annoying sidekick character, the Frady cat, who our lead has to push and prod through every single bit of this story.
Yeah.
He does have, like, I mean, do you disagree with me here that there's some steel underneath this guy here?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the steel, it's the underlying steel that makes his kind of degeneration throughout this part of the book tolerable because, you know, it's very easy to turn on a character who's being useless and breaking down and basically obstructing our hero's effectiveness and being whiny. But, you know, we get the sense that indeed Richard is the one in the driver's seat. And if he decided to give up Jack, then that would be over for him. And he doesn't. And so despite the fact that he's having a complete mental breakdown, he doesn't give up Jack. And he does have that steel. You know, and the idea that he wanted to give up, that he wished he never had anything to do with Jack, and then he immediately regrets it. That just immediately identifies him with those moments where Jack himself would wish that he could just abandon Wolf, and then later regretted that bitterly. And, you know, so we see that connection to him and our hero in an unexpected way.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Man, what a good character. What a well-drawn, wonderful character.
I do love Richard. Yeah.
So Richard continues to lose it and continues to reject what's happening, even as rocks start to be thrown directly into the room, as was predicted. They decide they need to get out, and they head over to the common room, and we get this wonderful passage. Richard looked reluctantly in. The common room was a shambles. Chairs were overturned. The cushions of the couch had been slashed open. The oil portrait of Elder Thayer on the far wall had been defaced. Someone had crayoned a pair of devil horns poking out of his neat white hair. Someone else had added a mustache under his nose, and a third had used a nail file or similar implement to scratch a crude phallus on his crotch. The glass of the trophy case was shattered. Jack didn't much care for the look of drugged, unbelieving horror on Richard's face. In some ways, elves troping up and down the halls in glowing unearthly platoons, or dragons over the quad, would have been easier for Richard to take than this constant erosion of the Thayer School he had come to know and love. The Thayer School Richard undoubtedly believed to be noble and good, an undisputed bulwark against the world where nothing could be counted on for long. Not even, Jack thought, that fathers would come back out of the closets they had gone into. God, I love all the writing there. I love the description of the defaced common room. I love the reflection on Richard here. The idea that he has made Thayer, his bulwark is the perfect word there, right? That the world is a place I don't understand and terrifies me because the world is more magical and chaotic than I want to admit. And so I will come to an institution of order and tradition and, conservativeness and here everything will be okay. Here I will be safe. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth because, as we said already, the deep irony of here being maybe one of a few places in the world where that is most untrue.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. I agree. It's this is the kind of stuff that makes me love this section. Is this idea of this character? It's just such a compelling idea for a sort of character.
Yeah.
And yet more here, is I think reinforcing this idea that what's happening to Thayer is almost specifically the stuff that would offend the sensibilities of a priggish 12-year-old boy in 1984 specifically.
Yeah.
Blue oyster cult pot and defacing the headmaster's picture. Like, whatever forces behind this has a very particular aesthetic. And it's got to be a reflection of what Richard finds offensive, because like if Tolkien's goblins got loose in Thayer, they would probably deface things, but not in this way. This is a way that is very specifically designed to just drive Richard crazy.
Yeah.
So
no, I think you're totally right there. Yeah. So before we move on, I just want to take a moment to stop here and appreciate the ambiance of this whole scene. Sometimes we get so into the character moments and the psychology of the characters that we kind of lose just the mood of what's happening right here. Like right now, there are two kids alone in a dorm. There are people outside throwing rocks and screaming at them to bring out the one they want. There's bells ringing ominously in the background. There's wolves howling. This is a horror movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think even not understanding why the enemies aren't coming in and wondering like if they might decide to come in at any moment is just amplifies the sense of horror and dread and like just impending doom.
It reminds me a lot of that episode of Chapelwaite, the one that I think we both said was our favorite, where they're kind of holed up in Chapelwaite and there are enemies all surrounding them. And it's very good tension. It's very good horror. I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
So the boys head up to the third floor looking to see if they could maybe find anyone else that's still here. And this, Matt, feels like the first moment that Jack really starts to get scared here, because we see that the whole third floor is filled with steam, and we find out why. We find out someone has been into the showers on the floor and just cranked them all. They're all on and cranked up to the hottest, and they just left them that way. And then we get this part right here. He turned them all off, one by one. There was no reason for him to do this, no reason at all, and he scolded himself for wasting time in such a way when he should be thinking of a way for them to get out of there, out of Nelson House and off the Thayer School grounds before the axe fell. No reason for it, except that maybe Richard wasn't the only one with a need to create order out of chaos, to create order and maintain it.
Mm-hmm. So here Jack is a man who would straighten bad pictures in strange hotel rooms.
I knew you were going to do it. I knew it. I pulled this section and I was like, should I make the pictures in hotel room thing? I was like, no, I have faith that Matt will go there and I don't need to say it myself.
Yeah. I don't think we're just being silly though. I think this is number one, a recurring theme in King's work. Number two, a specific theme of this book, or at least a thing that we're doing with this character here, where Jack, I think he's transitioning gradually from being someone who is just desperate and on the run to someone with more spine, more, I don't know, more, he's being cultivated more into that heroic figure that he's destined to be. Like I think that's where we're headed. We're not there yet though. And we're seeing, maybe this is him beginning to draw a line in the sand.
Yeah, he's becoming a gunslinger. I think that's accurate. And I think this is one of those more gunslingery qualities. And like, I don't know why, like, I love that the text acknowledges that it's a waste of time, right? That it's not enough to say, oh, Jack did this, and then we comment on how, that really wasn't necessary. No, the text shows Jack aware of this all, and he does it anyway.
Yeah. It's great.
So Richard manages to accidentally scare the shit out of Jack by grabbing him, a scene that will, exactly mirror the moment where Richard is grabbed while in the closet, which is perfect. And then the chapter ends with this. You haven't been experimenting with drugs, have you, Jack? While you were on the road? The old, intelligent, incisive light had suddenly rekindled in Richard's eyes. Here's a possible explanation, a possible way out of this madness, his eyes said. Jack has got involved in some crazy drug scam, and all these people have followed him here.
Yeah, sure, Richard. Yeah.
I just love the idea that he's like, his brain is just desperately searching for a logical, rational reason for things. And so like, it's just going to leap and attach itself to the first one that makes enough sense to be believable.
It reminds us a little bit of our conversation about what would it take to convince you of, that there's vampires if your friend says it. And it's like, I think one of the answers we settled on was like basically nothing, like basically you couldn't say anything. But then the further question is like, how much evidence would your eyes have to see before you decided that it was really vampires, or, that your school was really, falling into a hell dimension.
Yeah.
And would you first be like, I'm going crazy, or would you, at what point would you just accept that this is really happening?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. This whole reading reminded me of that conversation so much because, I think everyone wants to think that they'd be the person that just goes, oh, wow, this is really happening. Okay, I guess I just need to roll with it and accept it and just go with it. But I do, if I'm being honest with myself, think that there would definitely be a process for me before I got to, okay, this is really happening. I just like, I don't think I'd buy it right away.
Yeah.
I think, oh, I must be really sick and hallucinating is a conclusion that I might make about myself.
Right. I mean, it contradicts very fundamental assumptions about everything you believed about the way the world works. And that would that would be traumatic. Even if you accepted it as true quickly, it would still be traumatic because you would just feel so lost,
Yeah. So we move on to chapter 33, Richard in the Dark. This one begins with Jack finally done with this shit. This is where he gives the line, I'm tired of being treated like a pizza, after a rock comes through the window of Albert Humbert's apartment. Jack commands everyone to leave him alone in the name of the Queen. It doesn't work, but it does cause them to flinch as if whipped. Or does it work?
Yeah.
Because despite them declaring proudly to him that the Queen is dead, they do seem to like magically fade away. Right after this, like literally Etheridge, while he's talking, just kind of fades away and the world seems to shift again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of works. Like, I think Jack does have some powers over reality. I just think they're probably not as strong as we might wish they were.
Sure.
Maybe this is because he's part of the royal family. Maybe this is because he's Jesus. I don't know. We don't know yet.
Yeah. So offered a brief respite, Jack pushes Richard to tell him what happened with his father disappearing in that closet, and we get Richard's tale. I love this so much, so I'm going to read it all. It's a little long, so bear with me here, Matt. With his burning forehead pressed against Jack's shoulder, Richard coughed out the story he had held inside him all these years. It came in hard little chunks, like deformed bullets. As he listened, Jack found himself remembering the time his own father had gone into the garage and had come back 2 hours later from around the block. That had been bad, but what had happened to Richard had been a lot worse. It explained Richard's iron, no-compromise insistence on reality, the whole reality, and nothing but the reality. It explained his rejection of any sort of fantasy, even science fiction. And Jack knew from his own school experience, techies like Richard usually ate and drank sci-fi, as long as it was the hard stuff, that was. Your basic Heinlein, Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, Larry Niven. Spare us the metaphysical bullshit of the Robert Silverbergs and Barry Malzbergs, please. But we'll read the stuff where they get all the stellar quadrants and logarithms right until it's running out of our ears. Not Richard, though. Richard's dislike of fantasy ran so deep that he would not pick up any novel unless it was an assignment.
Yeah. The story of Richard's ordeal and the peek into his mind here is just my favorite.
I love it a lot. I love this writing, and I think we haven't said this yet. The whole thing feels Straub to me. Everything at Thayer feels very, very Peter Straub to me.
Yeah. The word choice, the way the sentences are constructed, some of the way in which he approaches Richard's psyche feels a little King, but that to me also feels kind of like Straub thinking, how would Stephen King approach this?
Sure.
Down to the level of just overall, I walked away from that feeling like it was very Straub.
So I don't know why this is where my mind goes weird sometime, but this whole background of Richard, which by the way, I want to preface this with I love, but this whole thing reminded me of those faith-based Christian movies where like the atheist characters are really just former Christians that are mad at God for some reason. Like they're in the world of these movies, like someone that just looks at all this stuff and says, I just choose not to believe in that. Like they don't exist. It's either Christians or former Christians. Yeah. That's what the world is.
Right.
And so that's Richard here, right? Like there is no people that genuinely just disbelieve in this stuff. It's either people who believe in it or people who had a horrible experience that forced them to no longer believe in it. I kid, but that is absolutely what is going on here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. I kind of suspect that these two wordsmiths probably themselves feel like anybody who doesn't like books must have had some kind of horrible traumatic experience, because
right.
what else could justify it?
These two men are like just such lovers of fiction that the idea that a person would consciously choose to not enjoy a novel is just something they can't fucking understand.
Yeah. What happened to you? Who hurt you? Yeah.
After all, though, like what kind of fucking monster doesn't love Lord of the Flies, right, Matt? Just awful.
What is wrong with you?
Yeah, I mean, that's literally Jack says, "What is it with you? What in God's name have you got against a good story, Richard?" And Richard had looked at him flabbergasted, apparently really not understanding Jack's anger. Well, there's really no such thing as a good made-up story, is there? Which is a sentence that they wrote consciously being like, this is the most fucking ridiculous thing any person has ever said in the entire world. There's no such thing as a good made-up story.
Yeah, it's
wild. Great. Yeah.
It reminds me of some report that I wrote when I was probably 10, where I wrote there's no such thing as a bad book, obviously. And it was just because in my life, every book that I had read was delightful to me in one way or another. And it's an
adorable, lovely conclusion. I hope you got an A.
Well, what was funny is that I think my mom was checking over it for me, and she read it and she was like, "That's not true." And I was like, well, every book I've read has been good. So yeah, I'm probably more like King in that way.
It is interesting to me though here, Matt, that once again we have a Lord of the Flies reference, right? Once again we have Jack basically saying, all right, so you haven't liked any of these books, Richard, but this one royally fucked me up. It changed me. So you'll read it and it will absolutely do the same to you. And of course this doesn't happen. And it's kind of become Lord of the Flies, that is, like the Stephen King text a little bit here, which of course Stephen King text is not it's Lord of the Flies.
No.
Now, of course, Stephen King has written so many books that making broad, definitive conclusions about him based on this limited sample of the 11, 12 or so books of his we've read, maybe not a safe thing to do. But I think like King like really likes Lord of the Flies, Matt. I think he really likes this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that LOTF has become a skeleton key that unlocks much of King in the way that LOTR also does.
You couldn't have just said the names of the books. You had to shorten it like that.
No, couldn't. Well, I'm just trying to emphasize that, I think he likes them because he just likes things that are called Lord of the.
Sure.
But no, I mean, I think there's a very strong thread of evil is mainly caused by ignorance and fear, and then amplified by mob psychology into total madness. That's kind of King, one of King's major theses on evil, and I think that's also very much present in Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, and I think that is central to the Dark Tower as well, because like I guess what I wanted to say here is we've taken a very small, limited sample size of Stephen King's text. He's written 70 novels and short story collections, or something around there. We've only read a handful of them, but everything we've read is Dark Tower or Dark Tower adjacent, right? So maybe there's something essential and core to the mythos of the Dark Tower stories in this particular novel. And I think it is exactly what you said. The view on evil is core to the Dark Tower, and therefore core to Stephen King, and therefore it becomes this incredibly influential text within the universe of the Dark Tower itself.
Yeah, it's I like that.
So we go into Richard's memory here, Matt, and we follow him as he follows his father into a closet. We know that his father is going into the closet to flip over to the territories, and then we see here that Richard Narnia's his way into the territories. Like he literally is walking through a bunch of coats and then finds himself in another world. Before he gets too far, he is grabbed by a scaly green hand with gross suckers all over it, and it scares him so much he is done with the world of fairy forever. I love the way the sentence is written. I know you didn't get to experience it this way, but it is in all caps. He has had enough forever. Capital He, capital had, capital enough, capital forever. It's perfect.
Yeah, it's this massive like period on all of that. I love the description of everything in here. It's so nightmarish. The scaly green hand and snaking away from this like lump with flat, hungry eyes.
Yeah.
Just fantastically terrifying description, especially for a little kid, which he is at the time.
But to your point from earlier, what the fuck's going on here?
Yeah.
So Morgan goes in there and flips over, which we will understand the details of how exactly that works in a few chapters. But it's been like 5 to 10 minutes since he did this. Where is Richard going? And how is he going there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's entirely possible that the places that Morgan Sloat is going to are, more like Minas Morgul than the places that Jack's father is going. And so he's just going places where there's a lot of evil, weird shit happening. And, maybe this green hand thing knew not to mess with him, and Morgan of Orris doesn't, isn't afraid of these things, but, a little kid is easily going to get snatched up. That's a possibility. I don't know if I believe that. Like it just seems like, okay, so I guess I do see that as the parsimonious explanation, is that he's Sloat's son. Sloat is always going to weird, fucked up places, and so he ends up going to weird, fucked up places. Whereas Jack is his father's son, so he just ends up in bright, happy meadows with butterflies, and thinks that the territories are awesome. Consequently,
sure. Yeah, I mean, there's no. Trying to think of the way to say this. We don't know that he actually followed his dad.
That's true.
He just went into a dark place and desperately searching for his father, and then ended up somewhere else. So maybe he flipped or migrated himself.
Yeah.
And didn't go to a good place. Maybe he didn't even go to the territories. Maybe he went to another level of the tower that is a creepy monster level.
That's entirely possible, right? Because like it could just be that the terror of this place reflected the terror that he was feeling in the moment. You know, maybe I think it does sort of seem like Richard and Jack have different relationships with how they interact with all this magic stuff. It's not that they just have like the same power so far anyway.
Sure. So Jack hopes that revealing the truth of his trauma would be the moment of breakthrough for Richard, but apparently it does the exact opposite, and it causes him to shrink further into himself. I just this moment, Matt, where he looks out and sees glowing eyes out the window, and his response to that is to take off his glasses, stomp on them, and then be like, "Oh no, my glasses broke." Like to literally blind himself from what he's seeing. I just love it. I just love the idea of literalizing the concept of you're choosing not to see.
Yeah. See no evil. Yeah. I refuse to see this. I refuse to engage with this. I'm going to go bury my head in the sand. No, it was great. It was a great moment.
And then I love the detail that we learn a lot later that he seemingly sees pretty good without those glasses anyway, which is a great further completion of this metaphor of like, it doesn't matter what you do, Richie, buddy. You can't look away from this. You can't turn away from this. You can't blind yourself to this. It is here. It is coming for you. There's no way of getting out of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also really loved the interaction between Richard and Jack. They're so good, Matt. And I love this moment here where Richard is like, this is after he stomped on his glasses. He decides he's going to bed. He's done with this whole thing. He's just going to sleep again. And Jack says, "Richard, do you want me to go away and leave you?" Richard looked back over his shoulder at Jack for a moment, blinking slowly. "You won't," he said. And then he went back to sleep.
Oh God, I love this. I thought it was a perfect moment, and it was perfectly delivered in the audiobook, and I just loved it so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, and he's right, of course. Which isn't to say Jack wouldn't eventually get to a place where he would leave Richard behind, but he's going to have to be pushed to that place. That is not a natural Jack thing to do, and I think Richard reads him perfectly.
Yeah, he knows that it's a bluff.
Yeah. So when the two wake up again, they find fungus growing on the walls of the room. Fungus which births fat white bugs all over the place. Matt, I'm going to ask the question once again. What the fuck is happening?
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that makes me feel like this is not just, the two universes are converging, because the territory doesn't have fungus bugs that we know of. It's more like, Toad Ash is leaking in. That's I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you either. It's just weird shit going on. I really do like this idea that we've settled on, though, that this is primarily a reflection of Richard's internal mental state. And so like the otherworldliness, the bugs, the monsters are now leaking in because his resistance is starting to crumble.
It's almost like this is kind of his psychic pocket dimension that's just reflecting his breakdown. Yeah.
The bugs finally convince even a self-blinded Richard that they need to get the hell out of here. But where do they go? And that's when Jack sees the depot, not just a theater, but once upon a time, this area was a big rail station, one of the biggest railheads in America. And then a light bulb literally goes off in Jack's head. A bright light suddenly went on in Jack's head, bathing all of his thoughts in its harsh glare. West Coast? His stomach lurched. He could not yet identify the new shape that the bright light had shown him, but the word that leaped into his mind was fiery and utterly clear. Talisman. West Coast, did you say? Yeah. So, what did you think of this moment? Like, obviously, he realizes, and the implication here is that because it is a depot in our world, perhaps the people who originally built this thing recognize this as a thin place between the worlds, and it could be a place where goods are transferred to the West Coast in both worlds and between worlds and all this thing, a guess that we see is basically proven correctly by the interlude. What do you think of the literal light bulb moment, though?
That was a really cool idea, a really cool moment. That what was interesting to me is it felt organic despite not really being specifically foreshadowed. Like I can't remember any specific foreshadowing that this place would be a transit hub, but then it happens. And it makes sense. And for some reason, the specific moment, the way it unfolded, the way it was written, felt very Straubian.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The Ghost Story, that book, so much happens there, and it's not that it doesn't make sense, but it feels like this very specific kind of wait, what? I remember experiencing that a lot while I read that book, where I think Straub is going for this kind of otherworldly sense of confusion, and that's absolutely what we get here.
There's a lot of hallucination and things that are never actually explained clearly, and you're meant to just linger in that state of uncomfortable uncertainty, and that's very much what's happening throughout all of these chapters.
Yeah. I do love when Richard reflects our general frustration here, where he says, I don't understand any of this. I don't understand what in the goddamn hell is going on here. Me too, Richard.
Yeah, right. I mean, the weirdness here reminds me of the weirdness in Ghost Story very much. Yeah.
The two sneak out to the side of the building and make their way towards the depot. All is looking good until the bells go off, and suddenly they're being chased by what the book beautifully describes as where prefix. I mean, God, it's so delightful. And then also the school headmaster. So Jack got his first and only look at Thayer School's headmaster, a tiny old man with gray hair, a big bent nose, and the wizened, hairy body of an organ grinder's monkey. He ran swiftly along on all fours with the dogs and the boys, a motorboard bobbing crazily up and down on his head and somehow refusing to fall off. He grinned at Jack and Richard as his tongue, long and lolling, a stained yellow with nicotine, fell out through the middle of his grin.
What a fantastic image. I want a painting of this.
It's so good because it's so fucking weird. The touch of that the school headmaster is just perpetually wearing a mortarboard for some reason. And not only is he wearing a mortarboard, but it's a mortarboard that is inexplicably sticking on his head even while he's running like a wolf. It's so weird and wonderful and terrifying. And to your point, you've said this throughout the whole episode, Richard's idea of what the worst thing would be possible is that the headmaster, the symbol of all that is order within Thayer School, has this other side to him. Like that we've been talking about duality so much throughout this whole book, and here's this wizened old man who actually has this incredibly hairy animalistic side to him.
Right. And the idea that it's the body of an organ grinder's monkey is so like undignified and absurd. It's not even like a bear. There's something cool.
Yeah, he's not even like you're right. He's not even monstrous in like an overpoweringly scary kind of way. Right. It's specifically horrifying because of its weirdness and slightly goofiness. Like the idea of a mortarboard on someone's head is goofy.
Yeah. Right. For some reason, the image that jumps into mind is the creature on the wing of the airplane in the Twilight Zone episode.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Where it's like it's not like the scariest thing in the world. It's that it looks kind of weird and sickly almost is what makes it scary.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that's just the image. Something about the body of an organ grinder's monkey that kind of made that association for me. But
no, I like that a lot. They're definitely very impish for sure. Yeah. So as the two sprint towards the depot, Jack realizes it is time to flip. And we see here that things do flip as Richard becomes his passenger, not the other way around. And despite Richard's terrifying reaction when he realizes what's happening, the two flip over to the territories and escape, and our chapter ends. And that's where we leave them behind for a little bit.
Oh, they're going to be fine.
Yeah, sure. So we move over now to our interlude as we wrap up section 3 of the book. This is titled Sloat in This World, Oris in the Territories 3. And now we're back with Sloat Sr., Matt, and this chapter that I think intentionally tries to ground the story after the last 4 chapters of, let's be honest here, but nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
We learn a lot about the rules of this world and get a lot of questions that we have been wondering about for a couple hundred pages now, finally answered. Matt, who wrote this interlude?
Stephen King wrote this interlude.
Yes. I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life that if everything in Thayer was Straub, which I don't know for sure if it was, I am 100% confident that everything written in this interlude was written by Stephen King.
Yeah. We are aligned on this. It is the most, it very much reminds me specifically of Dark Tower stuff. Like just the way everything works, the way it's written, the way Sloat feels as a villain feels very much like one of the way King thinks of these villain characters. Yeah, it's all consistent to me.
I do something I've noticed, a trend I've noticed a lot recently that I don't think I've ever articulated on this show, is how often King uses his villains to exposit rules and information about how the world works.
Yeah, I think you're right.
You know, like I'm trying to pull some other examples, and none are coming to my head right this moment.
I mean,
but
I think Randall Flagg, he of many names, toward the end of the Dark Tower, he kind of lets us in on some stuff that we weren't sure about. Spider Boy maybe lets us in on some stuff.
Yeah. I think it's kind of natural because villains generally seem to have more broader knowledge of what's going on than normally, especially in an adventure type book, you intentionally square your character as a newbie in the world, and it's still learning about how the world works so he can learn along with you. This is, kind of writing 101. And the villains are usually characters that have a lot more information, but also like there's mentor characters like Speedy hasn't really taught Jack how any of this works, right? Like he pushed him, he got him started, and then he let him go, but he really hasn't explained any of this except in very broad strokes. And it is Sloat here who to us explains the world.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And especially, we've waited most of the book and withheld this perspective for a long time, and now it's like, okay, we're gonna clear some stuff up. We understand we just hit you with a lot, and now we're gonna reveal some but not all of the mysteries, and we're gonna do it in a way where it's like definitive.
Yeah. So we start with Morgan Sloat getting the news that Jack has escaped their clutches again, this time taking Richard with him into the territories. So this sets us in time right after the events of the last chapter, so we know exactly where we are. And I love this section here. Sloat had not flown into a rage. Indeed, he had felt extraordinarily calm. He felt a sense of predestination, which he suspected came from that other part of him, what he thought of as his Orusness, a half-understood pun on royalty. I love the choice of the word half-understood pun, because that means the guy using the pun doesn't fully understand why it's a pun, which is like perfect Morgan Sloat.
Yeah. No, it's funny how the narration here takes just a little bit of an opportunity to make us clear that he's a piece of shit.
Yeah, there is, and again, this is a thing I've been noticing also, is that when we do these sections that are from the bad guy's point of view, it's always nasty and uncomfortable and gross, but also there's always this tinge of, look at this fucking guy, coming from the tone of the narration, right? Like that seems like the narrator made a little dig on Morgan right there. And like, he doesn't do it a lot, but like where possible, the storyteller gets his little shots in to yes, remind you that he's a bad guy, but also be like, this guy sucks, right? Yeah. This fucking asshole. It's really interesting writing to just know when to perfectly spear those narrator barbs in without letting the narrator point of view kind of take control of the story.
Yeah, it more makes us feel like we're kind of in on the joke with the writer, rather than just being fully in this person's mind.
And then we see Morgan migrate over to the territories and into Oris. And this is at last the answer to our question about how this whole thing works. If you have a twinner in the territories, when you flip over, you become them. You kind of take possession of their bodies, kind of like how Roland took over Eddie through his magic door. But because of this, you could only ever appear where they are. So when Morgan flipped over and Oris was suddenly there, that was just a coincidence, Matt. They just happened to be in the same geological place at the same time in two different worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many questions answered here. You know, we like you mentioned with Eddie, we can see how the idea of kind of possessing people between worlds has started kicking around King's Head here, possibly before here, but
yeah, there's so many proto Dark Tower things in this book in really interesting ways. I like it.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm glad that we're reading this as a Dark Tower connected book, because even if, I mean, okay, so for one thing, I'm not even sure if we've gotten to, the explicit Dark Tower connections that justify reading this book. It's more just like, well, this is obviously a precursor to the Dark Tower. This prefigures all the ideas that go into the Dark Tower.
Sure.
Yeah,
and I'm not even going to tell you when we will get to that and how and what it's going to look like. So you're going to have to figure that out for yourself.
It would be interesting if it never was any clearer than this, and it was just the idea of like, you can step between worlds, and yeah, that obviously makes you think of the Dark Tower. But yeah, no, I mean, we'll see. I'll pay attention.
Sure. And this, of course, means that Jack, due to his singular nature, can flip and appear wherever, right? Like he just shows up in the geological equivalent of his otherworld location. And this is his distinct advantage. And we see Morgan says this is the reason why he's evaded them so far, because he has this ability to do this. Richard, too, by the way, we learn has a twinner that died just like Jack. But we'll talk about that more closer to the end of the chapter, but that is important.
Yeah, just briefly while we're on that, I wanted to say, like, doesn't Sloat in here think something like, it would be a shame to lose his son, but well, Oris had survived the loss of his son and he was okay.
Yeah.
And you're just like, God, this fucking guy.
Yeah. I do love the detail of this migrating, though, Matt, because like how King chooses to describe Morgan's delight at suddenly losing 100 pounds at once, like suddenly being thrust into the body of a much healthier, more energetic person, stronger person. And then that feeling of the weight suddenly piling back on all at once when he shifts back into his own body. I love like the visceral detail there. It's just, it's delightful. It's classic King writing to me.
Yeah. We also learned, though, that while Oris doesn't have the same weight that Sloat does, that he does have a club foot. So they both have a disability of some kind, which I think is the mirroring, and how the mirroring is not direct, but is metaphorical.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've seen several cases where like we learn with both Jack and Richard that near-death experiences, or indeed death experiences, reflected on the twinners in the other world. And his clubbed foot makes you think, why doesn't Morgan have something connecting to that? Like more directly connecting to that? We don't know.
Yeah, good question. Yeah.
So Morgan makes it to Thayer School, and we see that it's gone back to normal. Everyone almost back to normal, right? Everyone seems uncomfortable. I think it says as if they've had a collective nightmare that they can't quite remember. And then Morgan thinks they simply don't know how fundamentally unreal they all were, as all creatures who live near the thin places between worlds must be. Which is just a wild thing to say, right?
Yeah, I don't even know how to interpret that. Like, should I take it literally? Like the people who live in Thayer are like less than fully human? I'm not. I don't think so.
I think you kind of have to. I mean, you don't have to take that as fact, but you kind of have to take that as that's how Morgan looks at them.
That's a fair point. Yeah. He kind of sees everyone as unreal.
And he sent his son here.
Yeah. He's it's funny how like when he's walking around the campus and like cheerfully reflecting on his time at this school, it's like he almost is like moderately likable for a second there. It's funny. I'm trying to hedge that statement because he's obviously horrible. But like it's sort of the text gives him a moment of being relatable and human in the midst of all this, where he's just like,
yeah,
he's just happy to be there. He's happy to be in this environment. And I don't know, I don't know if we're being invited to see him as a little bit more human, because he's been pretty horrible and monstrous and hateable this whole time. But I guess one thing we're being invited to see is like, he loves this place of like order and control. And like, that's the kind of thing that he wants to be the guy who's in power, and he wants order and control.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a fascinating thing that King does. And I think it's what gets him in quote unquote trouble sometimes, where people read perspectives of truly repugnant characters and see that King is giving them this complicated, layered characterizations where, yes, Morgan Sloat is a monster. He's a terrible, terrible human being, but he's also a person. And so like, we let him like enjoy things and like relax and like be happy, and like and while the book does do the little barbs we were talking about, it's not pervasive. And so there are moments where like you do kind of just be like, oh, I understand this person as a human being. And a lot of people push back at that at times, because they're monstrous human beings. They certainly are, but he's never afraid. Like it goes back to that whole idea that he talked about in On Writing, which is like, it's the truth. Like, you have to write the truth. You have to write the truth. And the truth is that however monstrous this guy is, he's a person. He likes being skinny. It makes him happy. It's fun. He enjoys it. And if we're going to tell things from his perspective, we have to capture that stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it would feel artificial and cartoonish if we didn't show the parts of him being human when it was called for. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we get a brief memory here of the first time Oris had migrated into Morgan, because we learned that not only can Morgan flip over, so can Oris. So Oris takes control of Morgan's body and goes to get some delicious American cheeseburgers, but he appears to be allergic to them or something, as he breaks out in terrible, terrible rashes and flips back over as quickly as possible. This is just kind of like thrown in here in the middle of the interlude, and it's just like, huh, okay. What do you think about it?
Yeah, well, it's useful to know that Oris can take over Morgan, and that there are in fact these more complicated rules to how all this works. I figured that maybe he just ate way too much, toxic fast food way too fast, and he broke out in hives. But
have you ever broken out in hives?
I just assumed that if you eat that much fast food that quickly, that you'd break out in hives and vomit. I've never tried it.
This week's episode sponsored by McDonald's.
Regardless of whether that's a thing or not, it does give us a strong sense that both of the Morgans have this like avaricious gluttony, where like they're both very much like concerned with like sensory experience.
Yeah.
Sloat really enjoys the vividness of the territories. He really enjoys being skinny. He enjoys it as like a kind of sensory enhancer. While Oris, he likes Earth because he can indulge in all of our gross super stimulus foods and hamburgers and stuff. So like both of them, it's like they both have a kind of a muted inner life of emotions. And so they substitute for that sensation.
Yeah. Sure. I think you're right. It is interesting. Oris is allergic to our world. So was Wolf. Like not in quite as a direct way, but it's really fascinating. Like now we have two characters who like physically react to being in our world in these ways.
Yeah. I mean, I was only half joking with like, the fast food being poison, but like it's double poison to Oris because he's from this land that's so pure and clean and pristine. And so to him, it basically is poison.
And it seems like that it only goes one way with that, right? It's like that the people from the territories cannot live in Earth, or whatever you want to call it. it's nothing directly bad has happened by just being there to them. Like Jack has never had a physical thing happen to being in the territories.
Yeah, right.
So just interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I'm not sure what more we're going to do with that concept, but it does seem to be the case.
So Oris also thinks the boys would have already gone on, in all likelihood, into the Blasted Lands. If so, the Blasted Lands would finish them, and Sunlight Gardener's twinner Osmond will be more than capable of squeezing out all the information that Anders knew. So I just love this because we learn about the Blasted Lands, which is a thing we don't know anything about, and our characters have not experienced in any kind of way yet. So we're learning about this before they do. But also there's this character named Anders that we don't know at all, that obviously helped them in some way. We don't know.
Yeah. Or I had the same vibe that he probably helped them, based on what we see here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. We don't really know. Clearly it's like an important person. Anders strikes me as like a good guy name. So we'll call that a prediction. We'll see if Anders is a good guy.
And spoiler for next week, but chapter 34 is titled Anders. Mm-hmm. So you will be finding out what's going on there very quickly. Mm-hmm. But I just love the way, because we're in this character's point of view, and obviously we didn't pick up right after chapter 33 left off, because obviously some stuff has happened to Jack and Richard in the territories in the meantime. But I just love the way King just drops stuff like this, and we're just like, who? What? Huh? Okay, whatever. Yeah. Sure. So despite everything being handled, Morgan flips back over into the territories just to check, and thusly we get to spend the rest of this interlude in the mind of Morgan of Oris, an angry, evil, club-footed man. We learn here, through Oris, that while Morgan is the one that plans the murders, it is Oris that actually carries everything out. Morgan is more of a planner, not a doer, and Oris is the doer for him. And this confirms everything that we've been told throughout the book so far, right? So we didn't know this definitively, but yes, Morgan did try to murder young baby Jack in the crib, just as Jack imagined it. Yes, Morgan did murder Phil. Yes, Morgan did murder Uncle Tommy. Like everything we've suspected Morgan of being involved in, we now know definitively, yes, he did all these things. Yes, he's just as bad as everyone thought he was. Yes.
Yes, I mean, it's funny. I definitely don't want to go defending Morgan here. But it's interesting that like he clearly didn't have the spine to do all those things. It's only because he has sort of the worst of both worlds, where he has like the scheming selfishness of Morgan Sloat and the cold ruthlessness of Morgan of Oris. These two sides of himself are kind of make him a much worse monster than maybe he would be otherwise, you know? Like maybe if he never found out that he had a twinner, he would have just been a kind of normal bad man and not a literal murderer.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I wonder how this relates to this concept of duality, you know, mm-hmm. that they're, you know, the man and the werewolf, the mm-hmm. twinner and the person, and how we are these people that exist with these two sides, and both sides of Morgan seem not very good, but you're right, they are not very good in very distinct different ways.
Yeah, it's like it's not Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's you know, Mr. Hyde and worse guy.
Mr. Hyde and Mr. Shit Hyde.
Yeah, Mr. yeah.
Murder Hyde.
P-head, yeah.
P-head?
Yeah.
P-head.
Yeah.
Why didn't we write that book?
Been hanging out with 7-year-olds, okay.
Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and P-head.
I've been waiting to show my 7-year-old this thing that I found where it's a book where the first word of the book is a typo and the word is preface and the typo is to say P-face. So just can't wait to show him that. Is
that like intentionally?
No, it's a typo.
This is like a published book?
Like a published book, yeah. P-face.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
It's great.
Okay. So I'm just trying to process this. But of course, Matt, we have to talk about Oris's son, who we learn here drowned in a pond after his parents got a little too drunk and took a nap during a picnic. So we learn that this boy named Rushton dies, but Richard lives. Jason dies, but Jack lives. So we have these two boys whose twinners both died young, and their real world counterpoints almost died. We learned that Richard almost drowned in a pool accident a few months after Rushton did. We learned that Jack almost dies by being murdered.
Right.
So why were they spared? You know, like that. I think that's one thing. Like the chapter ends with Morgan of Oris saying, "My son died, his still lives. Sawtell's son died, Sawyer still lives. But these things can be remedied, will be remedied. No talisman for you, my sweet little friends. You are bound for a radioactive version of Oatley, and you each owe the balance scales a death. God pounds his nails." Which is back to our Sunlight Gardener reference of God pounding his nails, which is delicious. But before we get to that, the idea that you each owe the balance scales a death, right? That like Jack was supposed to die, Richard was supposed to die, but they didn't. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I figured that I don't think the Morgans are right about this. I think that it's probably, there does seem to be some kind of balance that's held between the worlds, but I think that whatever happened, the balance is being maintained by keeping those boys alive. Like maybe it's because, those lives were taken through interference across the boundary between the worlds. The universe is going to bend over backwards to preserve the other half or something like that. I don't know. There doesn't have to be an explicit rule. I'm probably getting too rules lawyer about it, but the point is, I don't think, I think he's just being overly optimistic in this idea that like, they'll just die because they're destined to. It's like, well, they lived this long. I don't know why you'd think they would die now.
Yeah. And of course God pounds his nails. And I think the thing he says after that is, and if he won't, I will do it for him. It's really ominous and wonderful. But I think there is something to this idea. Like we've been told that Jack is very special. And now basically through these last couple of chapters, we're told that Richard is special too. Richard, can do the same thing. And I think this is from a storytelling structural perspective. You say, okay, now we want to have Jack flip into the territories and take Richard with him. And then maybe the other author or even one other editor said, oh, wait. You've just established a rule where you have to flip into your twinner when you go into the territories. Mm-hmm. You can't. And so like, oh, well, he died too.
Yeah, right.
But it does align them in a really interesting way, right? And it makes this character, Richard, start to feel considerably more important than perhaps we felt about him last week.
Yeah, I was even entertaining the idea that maybe he would like meet Richard. It would be like a bad meeting, and then he would just go on without Richard. Mm-hmm. But turns out no, Richard is actually a much more important, almost magically important character. So
yeah, and we'll see what happens to the two of them as they enter the Blasted Lands, yes. Which of course, as we all know, is the zone in World of Warcraft where the Dark Portal is.
Yes, exactly.
We all knew that.
Right. It's also the Wasteland.
Is it? Is it, Matt? Is it?
It's also Mordor. All these things are the same. All things serve the beam.
All right, Matt, that is it for our reading section for this week. Let's move on to our discussion question. Matt, what was the question we asked last week?
What makes a dramatic death sad?
A short question, but a complicated question. And I know it was a complicated question because a lot of y'all wrote full-on essays. So we're going to do this thing we do where we're going to try to live edit these as we read if we start to feel like they're going on a bit too long. I love that people wrote a lot of stuff, though, Matt, because sneakily, this to me is the central question of storytelling, in that it gets back to the thing that I am most fascinated about storytelling, which is that it works on us so well that we can read something or watch something that we know is not real, that we know is fake, and still be as emotionally affected by it as if it was. And like if you want to look at the core thing at the center of everything we do and why we do it, it's answering questions like this.
Yeah.
Why does this work? How does this work? It's magic, and I don't understand.
Right. Have you ever heard that the best test for whether a chef is going to be a good chef is just to ask them to make a simple scrambled egg?
Interesting.
So the reason I bring that up is I think dramatic, sad character deaths are the deceptively simple scrambled egg test of a storyteller, because you would think that it would be really easy to make people sad by killing a character, but actually it's a test of like 15 different things that have to be done correctly that can be very, very subtle and easy to screw up, or not so much screw up as just easy to do so that it's not quite right and it doesn't quite land as hard as it could. The difference between weeping and being like, oh shucks,
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, hopefully we'll figure out how to make those eggs as we read through people's answers.
Let's figure it out. Let's read these answers.
So Just Stand 8460 says, I think dramatic deaths work well when we have mixed feelings for the character throughout the story. We need to see the person struggle and want them to win, be set free in some way, or be reformed for bad guys that we've grown to empathize with. The author does this by connecting their death with some adjacent textual content which relates to their struggle. Example number 1 would be Wolf's tragic death because he succumbed to his werewolf self, part of his struggle in the story, due to extreme stress. He lost control and did what he swore not to do, kill humans. We felt pain for him because we knew his change was brought on by torment. Example number 2, Boromir died defending the halflings, but not before he had attempted to take the ring from Frodo. We feel pain for him because his father's voice has haunted him and his internal struggle has been felt along the way. I'm not going to read the third one because it's a spoiler for Game of Thrones, for Song of Ice and Fire, which some people may not have watched all the way through. But
and if you haven't, don't.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I like that. I like the idea that it hits harder when the character has some kind of deep conflict that is kind of unresolved at the time of their death. That feels sad to me. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
I love the concept of adjacent textual content, right? That I think we've talked about this before, that you are almost never sad just because of the death, but the way the death relates or pings off of something else. Yeah,
right. Like I just think it's a really great point that Boromir's death would not have felt anywhere near the same if he hadn't just tried to steal the ring from Frodo. And also if he hadn't been trying to save the other two halflings. Like both of those things are important ingredients.
For sure. Baby Can You Do Your Sam says, I can think of a few ways in which authors so masterfully twist the knife when killing people. One involves killing the innocent, whether it's a child, a pet, a disabled person. Offering an innocent is the surefire way to make me cry. Killing the dogs in Where the Red Fern Grows. The death of Lenny in Of Mice and Men at the hands of his BFF, and the soul-crushing loss of Dobby in the Harry Potter series. Spoiler. Does anyone care about... Serious question. I was not sad when Dobby died at all.
I think I was sad in the book.
I did not care.
I think I was.
I know that might make me a monster. It was a Dobby.
I mean, okay, so the thing... Okay, this is an interesting opportunity for a short sidebar, because I felt like a lot of the deaths toward the end of the Harry Potter series were the thing where you've overcooked the scrambled egg, where you're just piling on at a certain point. It's like it's no longer like once you're like there's so many deaths toward the end of that series that I'm no longer sad. I'm just like I'm just like sick, I'm just like I don't enjoy this. Like
so many fucking people die in that book that you're right that it's just like by the time we get to like the owl dying, right, I'm just like I don't give a shit about the owl.
And that's before we even get to the battle. And in the battle, just people are just dropping like flies, and you're like, I can't feel this because you aren't giving me the space to even feel this.
Yeah, I love your egg metaphor is absolutely right. I think she definitely overcooked that egg. And I mean, it's like this trap you fall into, and it's like the only way to establish stakes in a conflict is to show that people can die. And I was like, no, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's plenty of movies in which we know for a fact that nobody's going to die, that we don't need, that we still have plenty of stakes. So it was a little ridiculous. Sorry for completely hijacking your answer, Sam. Let's move back to it. But I did not care about Dobby. So that might make me monstrous. I don't know. I think it's because Dobby is such a little fucking shit in the Chamber of Secrets that I don't care that he got a redemption arc or whatever, that he was doing it for noble reasons and was freed, and like you were fucking annoying, buddy.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
Another involves the idea of redemption, sacrifice, heroism. Boromir in The Two Towers, Charlie in Lost, Jack Dawson in The Titanic, and the Iron Giant, to name a few. For me, the granddaddy of them all is Severus Snape's death in the Harry Potter series, which I think we just went on a Harry Potter ramp, but I think that's the only death in that final book that does actually work on me, because it's a character that's been around for 7 books, and I think Rowling does actually give it time to breathe and be sad.
Yes, you could do a fun compare contrast exercise about why that one works and the others don't. I think a lot of it has to do with what you just said. It's given the space and the focus and the adjacent textual material in the form of like context. The idea that he led this terribly tortured life and sacrificed and so on and so on, and that was made evident to us, and it wasn't just like bam, killed the kid, isn't that sad? You're sad now. I gotcha.
Yeah.
No, you can't do it. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm. Sam goes on to say, a third involves the author-writer murdering characters that you can't imagine dying, creating shock and bewilderment. They go on to list some more examples. Some of these I don't want to read, because who knows what is a spoiler and what isn't.
Yeah.
But they finish it off by saying, my first intro to literary death was at the cruel hands of E.B. White. As a 7-year-old reading Charlotte's Web, you are not prepared to watch Charlotte die. Who the fuck cares that her babies stick around to keep Wilbur company? Why did Charlotte have to die?
I'm still traumatized by that.
Because that's life. Yeah. That's life. The spider dies.
Yeah. But did you have to? But it's fiction. You could have just had her not die. It's your choice. You killed her, E.B. White. All right, next.
That's the whole point of the book, though.
I know, but nothing should ever be sad, Scott. Emperor Fried the Solid says, I think Scott touched on something important in asking the question, we, the reader or watcher, need to be immersed in the story for a death to have any impact. If we're watching a movie that hasn't got our emotional investment, then dramatic deaths are cheesy. A book that hasn't earned our loyalty can feel corny or maudlin when they try to create a sense of feeling around a death. Cold Comfort Farm is a great example of satire in this vein. But every dog death in every media ever is sad, and I will fight anyone on the spot.
That is a fact. All dog deaths are sad.
I really like this idea that like cheesy and maudlin are like, once again, Russell conjugations for like emotional, impactful, heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. That's a great a great idea.
Because every person that exists on this planet has at one point played pretend the dying scene from a story, right?
Yeah.
Where they've like lied on the ground and like done basically the Boromir death, where you're like you're talking for an extended period of time, which nobody actually ever dies that way. And it's absurd. And when you aren't invested in the thing, it is cheesy and stupid, and you're like, nobody dies this way, and that's why all the satire movies make fun of it all the time. But when you're invested in the characters, it's horrifying and heartbreaking, and you don't pay attention to the fact that it's absurd that Boromir is having a 3-minute conversation with Aragorn as he's slowly bleeding out of multiple arrow wounds in him. You're absolutely right, Emperor Fry, that it is just this is how it works. That if you buy into the story, this is my central complaint about the way people talk about stuff they don't like, is they almost never are accurately like diagnosing what they don't like about the thing.
Yeah.
Is that like, if you look at a death scene and say this death scene is cheesy and maudlin, the problem is the movie's not working on you for some other reason.
Right. It's what was leading up to the death scene that was the problem. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's everything except the death scene, possibly.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah, that's cool.
Pear Jane says, for me, it's either a self-sacrificing death, one in particular that shall not be named here yet. Matt, ooh, I have some ideas of what Jane's talking about here, but I'm not quite sure. So we'll see.
Okay.
Or more frequently, one that was beloved by other characters. I'm sad when I lose a character I love, but when another character I love reacts to that death, it destroys me. While I feel the loss of a character myself somewhere inside, I know I'm just an observer. When I see someone else feel the loss, someone they actually knew and interacted with, then I put myself in that person's position and I feel the grief far more intensely. In The Dark Tower, I'm sad I lost Eddie, but devastated for poor Susanna. When Jake dies, it's Roland's reaction that's upsetting to me, and Jake and Oy both have an additional self-sacrificing to drive the stakes deeper. There's a death in the movie Serenity, based on the show Firefly, that gutted me, but it was because I kept imagining my partner's feeling of loss. In West Side Story, the death of Tony is sad, but it's Maria that actually makes me cry. It's Anita who makes me cry over Bernardo's death. For the seventh sake, I even felt sad for Cersei when Joffrey died.
Yeah.
I think I have an empathy problem. No, I don't think you do. No. I think that's your empathy drive working exactly as it should.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. In fact, I've been aware for some time that like the way you make a sad scene in a movie is you show the character being sad. And it works. It's like cheat codes in movies, because if you show a human face actually crying and incredibly being sad, then you will feel for that person. In books, it's harder because you can't see it actually, but there are tricks. Obviously, Stephen King knows them. A lot of writers do know them.
Yeah,
it seems like some writers weirdly don't know them, but which is interesting. But yeah, I totally agree. This is a cheat code.
It's great. I love it.
Just good technique. Cheat code sounds pejorative. It's the way to do it.
And I do think you're supposed to be sad for Cersei when Joffrey died. Like, Cersei sucks, but like no one deserves to watch their child die. It's right. God, I can't imagine.
Well, I think that's the great thing about the Song of Ice and Fire books in general is like Cersei sucks because her life has been like really weird and bad.
Yeah.
And in like complicated, weird ways that she's such a monster at the point in the story that we meet her that it's difficult to empathize, but like actually you kind of should try to because I don't know, it's psychology. It's worth understanding.
I mean the thing about empathy is that like it in and of itself is not like inherently dangerous. Like feeling empathy for a bad person doesn't mean you suddenly like allow them to do bad things, like it's I don't know. Empathy is one of the most important things we as a species have. And so like, I will always think it's a good thing to have empathy.
Yeah. I don't think I mentioned this in a long time. So I'll mention again, like I was reading this thing where this writer was making a point about empathy and he just started listing facts about Osama bin Laden. And saying like Osama bin Laden was an avid fan of volleyball and stuff like this. And then, after a few bullet points, they stopped and were like, did that start to feel weird? Did it kind of start to feel like I was trying to make you like Osama bin Laden? I was just listing facts about him. I wasn't trying to do anything. You were becoming uncomfortable about the fact that you were humanizing him and thus empathizing with him just because you know more facts about him than he's a murderer. And like, yeah, we kind of automatically empathize.
I think like, I mean, to get back to the evolution conversation we were having with the panda's thumb, like empathy at one point it was decided that empathy is an evolutionary advantageous trait, right? And that's why we developed this incredibly strong empathy machine that kicks in crazily. I mean, this is to get back to it. This is why these stories work on us, because we have this incredible ability to generate empathy for people and things, regardless of whether they really exist or not. And it's fascinating to me, and I refuse to ever think of it as a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's definitely a good thing. Yeah.
And plus, the cool thing about fiction is it's truly a safe space to have empathy for terrible people because they literally don't exist. Yeah. They didn't actually do any of those bad things because they're fake.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. Damien to me 1111 says, When I think of deaths that hit the hardest for me, I agree with Jack's assertion. And as Scott noted, it hurts most when they're noble. Like Wolf or Jake, who sacrificed themselves to save another. In both those cases, it's made worse because you see it coming and try and start to try to to speak to the writer back through time. Please don't do this. If the death feels unfair, like when Sergeant Elias is betrayed by one of his own in the movie Platoon, he was brave, he had integrity. He took our protagonist under his wing, and he was betrayed. Speaking of unfair, when Susan Delgado is being returned to Magus to be burnt alive in Wizard and Glass, she said a prayer, "Keep my love safe." Rhea notices and responds with, "Praying, dearie? You'd be well to make things right with the powers while you still can, before the spits burn right out of your throat." And it's like, yeah, the point they're making here is that Rhea is just kind of piling on even after already winning. And this just emphasizes the unfairness of the death and makes the unfairness hurt even more.
Yeah, I think nobility is absolutely crucial in that regard. You know, like I think it ties into that idea of self-sacrifice that we see so many of these deaths. This idea that, like, I think there is something inherent to us as living creatures who all are, despite what anyone says, fucking terrified of dying, because I think we all are just fucking terrified of dying, and it's just whether or not someone's fear of dying is as actively ruining their everyday existence or not is just the difference between all of us. But just, I think this is why the idea of self-sacrifice is so appealing to us, because like we're all afraid of this thing, and you're choosing the thing that we're all afraid of, and you're doing it for someone else, and it's just like, wow. For the good of the tribe. That's evolution saying, yes, and this is great. This is great. For the good of the community, one person will sacrifice themselves. Yes. Right. This ensures maximal survival. Love this emotion, humans. Love it.
Right. Yeah. This person will be a hero forever, and we'll cherish their memory. It's a well-executed sacrifice death is just maximum pain for me. I love it.
Drunk Phoenix says, for me, a dramatic, impactful death ties directly to why I love King's works in general. Fully fleshed out characters you can understand and empathize with. You've talked before about the specifics that he includes to better place you in the story, Coke instead of soda. He does the same thing with his characters, spending a lot of time building them. When you have that deeper connection, whether you love or hate the character, their death has meaning. Yeah, we've been talking about, deaths that make you sad, right? Because that's kind of the function of the question. But I think more broadly, it's just deaths that impact you. I think like Mordred sucked, but that death scene is emotionally impactful, not just because it leads to the death of Oi, but because we see this tragic, horrible tale of the spider baby that lived this short, terrible, and ultimately meaningless life.
Yeah.
And it's because we've spent so much time with Mordred over the course of this final book that has emotion to it too.
Yeah.
It's not sadness, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we did spend a lot of time understanding how miserable Mordred's existence actually is. Like, I think mostly we felt pity for Mordred, actually. So,
yeah.
All right, Tet Corporation 19 gives us the first answer that they've given. So welcome to the answering forum, or whatever word we're going to use for that. Sorry. They say, last week my 11-year-old son and I were talking about what he's been reading, and he mentioned that it was the first time a book made him sad. It led to a great conversation about things that make a book good, one of which is, IMO, the ability to make the reader feel something real, and what good purposes reading can serve in life. A big one being that reading trains us constantly to place ourselves in another's shoes, see things from their perspective, and open ourselves up to their feelings, experiences, etc., training empathy in readers. It was a great conversation that bears on this discussion question. The saddest I've ever been when reading was undoubtedly when the father died in The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I guess that's a spoiler. They go on to say, I legitimately cried. I think it's a great example to figure out what, for me, are the necessary ingredients that make a dramatic death sad. And then they list bullet points. Number one, it has to be a good character, or at least someone with potential for good in them. I need to be able to picture them on the side of the white, even if morality in the story is less clear cut than that binary of a setup. It seems if there's a sacrificial angel involved, it helps if there's a sacrificial angel involved, or what angle, Jesus, sacrificial angle involved, what others have called a noble death, is even sadder to me when the death is pointless, like Eddie's. And number 4, the character must not be a red shirt. It goes without saying, of course. I have to have seen inside their motives, have been shown their actions align with said motives, and be able to commiserate with their plight somehow. Yes, I agree with all of that. That character in particular, the idea of carrying the fire, I remember being very reminiscent of the whole gunslinger white ethos. So it's a cool connection there.
I have a question. Like, I keep going back to Breaking Bad, and so spoilers for Breaking Bad, the very ending. Fast forward like 2 minutes if you don't want to hear this. But Walter White is not a good person. He's not a morally good person. And yet, the end of that show, I am sad by his death.
See, I'm not sure if I'm sad by his death or so much as that's the culminating moment of a whole bunch of stuff that I am sad about.
Sure.
Maybe I'm sad about his death, though, and it's totally fine if you're sad about his death. That would be fine. I don't think I think he's a relatable person. I think he's a tragic figure. He's a classic tragic figure, doomed by his own flaws, but containing some good elements. And so I don't think it's wrong to be sad at the death of a character like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. You're absolutely right, because I think the point of a tragedy in the classic Greek term is for you to feel some sort of emotion towards the tragic character.
Yeah.
Not primarily sadness, but certainly some sadness mixed in. And to do that, they have to be a deeply flawed character to go down that tragic lane.
Right. Because I mean, we're definitely rooting for Walter at different points. Like it's funny because I think the pendulum has now swung, almost to the point of being unreasonable, where it's like, obviously Walter is the villain of Breaking Bad, but also you're totally rooting for him for like most of the show. Yeah,
I think it's revisionist history when people pretend like the entire time they were watching Breaking Bad, they were watching just because they couldn't wait to see Walter fail,
right,
and die. Like I don't believe you. I don't believe you.
And the show is setting him up against people who are basically worse than him most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's not you were sort of righteously rooting for him. It's only at a certain point it's like it goes too far. And
well, they're worse than him, but in order to defeat them, he always becomes them.
Yeah. He literally absorbs their traits. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. He eats them.
Yeah.
He's a cannibal.
He's a cannibal. Yeah.
Next we have AL84001 who says, it's just like my buddy Steve K always tells me. The 3 keys to a dramatic death scene are location, location, location. He's sweet, total nut job, but he means well. Of course, he follows it up with a rambling lecture about making sure you show how the death affects the other characters in the story. We humor him and nod. It's sad when the old folks' mind go like that. This is a very tongue-in-cheek answer. Inevitably, he'll follow up with something like punctuate their loss by having a scene where they verbalize what the person meant to them and how they have to carry on with that quality now. You can't help but laugh. The guy's neck deep in shit filled Depends adult diapers. This is very mean. But he acts like this is some kind of golden formula and brags he's milked it for years and a lucrative writing career. We wipe the drool from his face, and afterwards he turns back to watch the 7th Futurama reboot on TV. The episode had Fry's dog. Heard it's pretty sad stuff.
Oh my God. Yes.
I hope Steven doesn't listen to that.
Yeah. Jesus. Sorry, Steven. The Fry's dog episode. I don't even know why that made me so sad.
Because it's a dog.
I guess you're right. I guess that's the sort of exception where it's like you don't have to do anything else right. If it's a dog, then it's just automatically. No, I do know what's sad about that. It's because the fucking dog waited its entire life for Fry to come back, and he never did. That's what was sad.
Would you be as sad if it was? I guess you would if it was a human. I guess you would.
Maybe. I mean, the thing about a dog is they're pure and innocent.
Yeah.
By their very nature.
Yeah.
And utterly loyal and so forth. So yeah.
Let's just reiterate, like, killing dogs is like the worst thing you can do ever. It breaks me. Like, I watch a lot of like horror shit that's awful and terrible and horrifying, right? I don't ever have to look away from that stuff.
Yeah.
It affects me emotionally. It works on me the way it wants to, but never in a way where like I can't watch this. I fucking can't watch when dogs die. I love the John Wick movies. I cannot like knowing that cute, adorable little tiny little puppy is about to get killed. Like I like the noise. The movie plays a noise when it's fucking awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. And then you're like, please kill everyone now.
Yeah, please do it.
Yeah.
Do it, John. And he's still going. Yeah. Movie 4 comes out this year. Kill him more.
How many people have died?
Thousands.
And it's fine. It's still not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a basis for a series of movies. All right. Next from Walking Dude 22. This is a lengthy answer, and we do appreciate the lengthy answers, but at the same time can't read all of this. Some fictional deaths are more impactful than others. Bringing home a character death is a sort of magic trick authors do. As with any good magic trick, there are 3 parts: the setup, the pledge, the delivery, the turn, and the follow-up, the prestige. The setup involves introducing the character. It's where the audience learns about the character, and we get a description, a mental picture. What do they wear? What are their mannerisms? King does this very well. The delivery, number 2, is in the extended character work. In this stage, we learn about motivations, hopes, dreams, and fears. This is the place where the author shows us the importance of the role the character will play. This part of the trick lasts until the moment of death and involves basically building empathy with the audience and seeing our own humanity reflected in the character. And then finally, the follow-up of the trick, the prestige, is the moment of death. It may involve the character's own experience of coming to the clearing. It usually brings home the affect upon the rest of the cast. Additionally, it shows how the character death changes the direction of the story. Where do we go now? When this is done effectively, we connect to the characters on a deep emotional level. Their hopes are our hopes. Their journeys reflect our own. The death of Eddie is a prime example. I really, really love this because it emphasizes, this is Matt talking now. I really love how it emphasizes like the moment of the death is actually part 3. It's not the sadness of the death depends on you having done the correct setup and delivery before you finally get to that moment.
Yeah, I think this is so key. And I talked about a movie last week that had a death in it that was just the worst. And I don't want to repeat the movie because I'm about to talk in detail about it. And I don't want to spoil it for people who might still want to watch the movie. But when you introduce a character and then have their wife die, like the next scene where you have no idea who this person is and you're just told about their relationship, but you don't see it, you don't care. Mm-hmm. You don't care. Like, it's just like, look, it's okay. Like, I am not one of the people that thinks it's like bad to use death to motivate characters. I think death is an incredibly powerful motivator in storytelling. It works very, very well. But like, when death is used as a motivation, it doesn't produce sadness in me. Like, I don't get sad when a character is motivated by a death because especially when it's a death of a character I have no emotional attachment to at all. Like, it works as I understand why this character wants to do this thing now, that it works, but it's not sad.
Yeah.
And so you can't try to make it sad.
Yeah. The only instance I can think of that not being the case is when they kill Maximus's family in Gladiator. And that's because we've set up Maximus as like, this is all he cares about. This is all he's thinking about, even when he's at war. And you've taken that away from him. So you're really not sad about his wife and son. You're mm-hmm. sad about Maximus, who's the character that you actually love. And of course he performs the absolute devastation of the moment of finding their bodies perfectly. So that helps too.
Yeah. Yeah. Next, we have Drugs Possum, who says, well, obviously not the only ingredient to tragic death in fiction. One of the biggest factors is the reaction of the surviving characters. It's why Jake's death feels much sadder in the last book than the first. Roland's reaction to losing him is so much stronger, and we empathize with his loss. Excellent point. I know that's been made by some other people, but it's great to reiterate that the saddest part of a death is how characters react to it, not the death itself. And the parts of Jake's death that make me cry are Roland's speech as he lays Jake to rest, and Roland, burying him, and Roland and Oy kind of commiserating. And it's not the actual physical moment of Jake's death.
Right.
And King understands that for sure.
Yep. Steve L says, I think it depends on the reader's investment in the character, plus the unexpected/unnecessary aspect of the death. The more the reader cares about the character, the sadder the death is, especially when it's a big surprise and or totally unnecessary. But to do all that, it really comes down to good writing. So few authors can write a great character that readers fall in love with. King is a master of this. That's why it's always worth it when reading so much background in his long novels. Yep. Yet again, it's the background, it's the setup that actually carries off the effect.
Yep. Love it. Love it so much. Last but not least, we have Sigma, who says, I think there has to be a visceral separation between the dying character, the surrounding characters, and the audience in order for a dramatic death to be truly effective. I don't have too many deaths to reference, but Persona 3 and XXX Holic have two of the saddest character deaths I've ever experienced, and both had that quality I mentioned. In XXX Holic, I was shocked Clamp was actually going to go through with it, and that death in Persona 3 felt like the most appropriate way to do things given the game's themes, and that music in the end. Yes, I think this is something Sigma brings up a good point here. Music is a cheat code. Music will make you sad. Always put good, sad music over your death, and it's a path to victory.
I like that Sigma could just be making things up completely. Could just
I have no idea what these
putting together just random word combinations.
I know what Persona 3 is. I know what that is. It's a video game that I have not played.
Okay.
I have no idea what the other thing is.
I've heard of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So
yeah, which is the next thing they say. It's like, despite being known for its silliness, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has made me cry the most over reading its 30-year and still going run, and all of them were just painful separations of the highest order. This is really interesting because I think there's a term here that we haven't really talked about. I think it molds into everything else we've said, right? But to put a specific idea of that it's a separation, right? That you are removing something from something. So, for a character to feel, for you to feel sad at the death of a character, you have to feel that the thing is removed. It's removed from the equation. It's removed from the story. It's removed from other characters' life. I mean, that's what death is, right? Death is, in essence, a separation. And if you were going to dramatize it, you have to dramatize that separation.
Yeah, I like that. That's, because like, if there's not a separation, then it's not really death in the way that we typically think of it. So yeah, that's a good point. I'm thinking,
which I think is just another way of like saying the idea that you need to show how character deaths affect the other characters around them, right? Like that's how you dramatize the feeling of separation, is you have a character feel that separation, and then thusly through your empathy machine, you, the reader or watcher, feel that separation. Yeah, right. Because like for you get to boot up the episode again and the character's still alive. Right. You get to reread the book and Eddie's back. Like, so there really is no honest, real sense of separation for you, because that character only existed in your mind and can continue to exist in your mind. So in order to really generate that separation, it has to be from within that world. It has to be. Yeah. I'm rapidly flipping through deaths in my head. I'm actually thinking of a specific manga death because this is a very anime heavy answer. You've betrayed me. Well, last time. I'm trying to relate to the listeners here, Scott. And it's like, I'm trying to think, like, it was probably one of the very few times that I've cried while reading, and it was about a manga. And I think it was largely because, like, it's a character doing a self-sacrificial death, and they're doing it to save their student, and their student, looks up to them as like their sole mentor, like the sole person they look up to as a hero in their life. And
like it's sad that it's a sacrificial death, but what's really sad is that this other character is losing their mentor. What's funny about that is that they don't actually die, but it still makes you cry because you think they are going to die.
Classic,
it's great, so great, such a great manga. I love manga.
I've never been more angry with you than I am in this very moment. It's about to be another really sad death in this podcast.
Oh, well, let's start setting it up then. I guess that was the setup.
There was. All right. That is it for those answers. Thank you again, everyone. You all wrote such long answers, and we tried the ones that were short enough. We read them all. The ones that weren't, we kind of tried to skip around, and apologies for that. But we wanted to encapsulate your whole answer, knowing we couldn't read the whole thing. But I loved it. I loved this discussion. Thank you so much for everyone participating in it. I have lots to think about and lots of deaths to be sad about.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding us of all those horribly sad events.
As for next week, Matt, what is our discussion question going to be?
What is your favorite scene of surrealist horror in storytelling?
This is one of those fun things where we can say the phrase surrealist horror and then not define it in any kind of firm way, and therefore let our listeners decide what they think surrealist horror means.
Yeah, I look forward to these because I feel confident that we'll get a lot of answers where I never would have thought of it.
Yeah. And I have not seen every single horror movie out there, so I'm sure a lot of them will be things I just haven't seen. And Matt, you might want to bring out your list again and be ready to write some stuff down.
Absolutely. I sure haven't seen a lot of horror movies.
Yeah. So that is the question. Please send those answers in. A reminder for folks, we had some people reach out, like curious as to why their answers weren't read. We record this episode typically on a Monday evening, sometimes Tuesday, which is what we're doing now. So if you send your answers in after that, it's not that we're choosing to not read them. It's just we've already recorded the episode for the week. So our schedule is pretty inflexible because we have to squeeze all the stuff in the very little bit of spare time we have. So we're not excluding you intentionally, is the point I'm trying to get to.
But I mean, upshot is if you answer the question as early as possible, you increase your odds of getting in under the wire. So
there you go.
Yep.
But you could also do the thing that I know some of our listeners have done before, where they answer the question based off just the discussion question in the episode post, and they haven't listened to the episode yet, and we say something like, "Whatever you do, don't answer this." And then, and Sam, I'm thinking of you right now.
So, there's always a catch-22.
So you got to roll the dice. You never know.
Roll the dice.
So that is the question for next week. Favorite scene of surrealist horror and storytelling. Can't wait to see what y'all come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, Jack and Richard enter the Blasted Lands as we begin part 4 of the Talisman, titled The Talisman.
Oh.
It's the last part. We're getting there, Matt. We'll be reading chapters 34 through 36. I think the shortest number of chapters we've covered in one episode, but they're a little bit longer than normal.
Okay, cool. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod and over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia.
And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do so, to make sure you never miss an episode or a bonus thing or anything else we're doing. You can find us on every single podcast platform that exists. I can't confirm whether that statement is true, but it probably is. So look us up and subscribe.
Yeah, who can say? Who can possibly say? If you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patron Evan C. Welcome. Hope you enjoy all the cool stuff we have over there, including 780 episodes of Other Levels of the Tower.
I think it's like 14, Matt.
14 episodes of our bonus podcast where we talk about adaptations of Stephen King stories.
Great fun. Lots of fun episodes. We also have our Doof After Dark series, which is just random stuff that we're talking about after finishing up recordings. The other day, Matt and I talked about World of Warcraft for like 45 minutes and then virtual reality, which is a wild conversation that I definitely didn't think I was going to be having in 2022, but here we are.
Yep.
All right. If you cannot afford to donate it to us right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing the podcast. Share it alike. Please do. We appreciate all of those shares. And of course, you can always help us out by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that supports those. This week's Spotlight review comes from Ducks Love, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Great deep dive. I'm a constant reader of 30 plus years. I've read the Gunslinger series many times. I've already had a great podcast for King in general, but I really wanted a real deep dive into the series. These two are really terrific at a deep dive discussion. The episodes are lengthy, which initially concerned me. Oh no. However, for how fully they cover each chapter, it's really worth the time. The only thing I would change is I wish they would included a female in their discussion group. They do briefly discuss how King used to write women, but a woman's perspective is nice for more reasons than the problematic stuff." I agree with that. We would love to have some women on, whenever possible. We talked earlier about how it's very difficult for us to schedule guests because our schedule is so crazy. But more perspectives is always a good thing from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some women on the Doof network, but
I don't think any of them read King though. Unfortunately, sadly, heartbreakingly,
would be hard to do a crossover with them. Anyway,
but thank you so much, Ducks Love, for that review, and thank you everyone else for those ratings and reviews. We do appreciate them. Please keep them coming. All right, Matt, another long episode, which is initially concerning me, but what can you do? What can you do?
I'm also concerned.
Shortest number of pages we've covered in the whole book, and yet one of the longest episodes. We're out of control.
Yeah, podcast goes to hell.
All right, folks. Thanks again for tuning in. We will see you right back here this time next week for another, hopefully a little bit shorter episode of Kingslingers. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.